The father-daughter ball was recently at all the campuses, and I didn't get to do it, but because my daughter doesn't live around here, and she would never let me take her to that. But I found out yesterday she was featured in the UCA magazine for recruiting, and so here's a picture of my daughter right there in New York City. How about that? Come on. And I wish it said, "Go here, stay here," but it doesn't. She's in New York, and as you can tell, she got her looks from my wife, Jill, but she got her brains from my wife, Jill. But I was responsible for giving her some of the attitude she has, and believe me, she's got a little bit, all right? So that's good. So she's great. I have 2 children that live in New York. I think everybody knows that. So my son was moving out of his apartment and asked me to come up. I think I've talked about this. And so he goes, one rule when you come up is that you can't drink Starbucks coffee. I say, what? What's up with that? He goes, Dad, look, I live in the West Village, and within walking distance, there are the best coffee shops in the world within walking distance, like famous new coffee shops. And he goes, but I like Starbucks. He goes, well, are you coming or not? That's the rules. All right, I'll come. And so I came, and it's actually changed the way that I drink coffee, because I've kind of seen it's a craft coffee kind of renaissance going on. How many of you love coffee in the house, right? Come on. So how many of you like it maybe just a little too much? I was like, I know, but so no matter what you think about Starbucks, they changed the way culture is in the United States. When Howard Schultz, they have 24,000 stores. Do you know that? 24,000, that's a lot of cups of coffee. But what Howard Schultz was not the founder of Starbucks, but he joined them in 1982, and he was on a buying trip in Milan, Italy, where he decided to go and just sit in the Italian coffee shops to see how they went. And he found out that this isn't just a place where people come and get their caffeine fix. This is a place where you sit down, and this is a community place. Parents bringing their children by, businessmen sitting there for hours, and just like this is a place where life happens around the cup of espresso. And it was kind of like, it opened his eyes, and he said it became like a love affair to him, not to be dramatic. But through a long series of events, Howard Schultz bought the company that we know is Starbucks in the late 80s, and they had some, I think we all know they grew really fast. They started being everywhere, and then they hit a couple of bumps around 2006. They had to shut a few stores, and then Howard Schultz pulled aside and let an ex-Walmart CEO become the president of Starbucks. You may know this story. And so it was so successful after that the stockholders, they would look at the financial statements, and it was amazing how much profit and sales had grown under the leadership of this ex-Walmart CEO. But something had gone wrong, and that was that coffee sales were down, that there were a lot of complaints about the quality of the coffee itself, and customer service was at an all-time low. And Howard Schultz realized that they compromised the very thing that they loved the most. It had become dull and routine. So he came back as CEO, and in 2008, I don't know, I remember trying to buy a cup of coffee one day in 2008, and they shut 7,100 stores in the United States from 3 p.m. till midnight to train people how again to make a great cup of coffee and to bring back the atmosphere that he so wanted Starbucks to have. The very thing that they had passion for had just become dull. And this is a really great lesson for our lives, because whether it be your career or your relationship or your ministry, how many of you know you can start out doing something with a passion, and after time, it can just kind of wane, it can become old, just like that, right? I mean, Jesus said this would happen in the last days. He said in Matthew 24 and verse 12, he said, sin will be rampant everywhere, And the love of many, and in some translations it says the love of most, will grow cold. Look, relax. I'm not going to get super spiritual on this point today and tell everybody, oh, your love for God is just not enough. That's not where we're headed here today. This is going to be an encouraging word about how to keep your love alive. So 1 John chapter 4, we're going to have a couple of scriptures out of that chapter. I love it. It says this, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone," look at this, "everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." That's pretty definitive. This is how God showed His love among us. He sent His one and only Son into the world that we might live through Him. And I'm going to tell you, I believe that's the reason that many of us are here today. Because when we were like, we had nothing to offer to God, we were unattractive to Him in any way, somehow His love came in and changed the way that we live and the way that we see life. And we began serving and helping other people and getting involved in life groups and other things where we could have community. It changed the whole direction. Life was actually imparted into us because God sent His Son. But love can get cold if we're not careful. Can I have an amen? It really can, right? So today I'm going to get right into the points, and I want to talk about 3 things to remember about keeping love alive and strong. And the first one is this, if you have your notes, it's that love is a decision, not a feeling. And yeah, that's a good point, but how many of you are glad that love does have feelings too? Right? I mean, what would love be without feelings? Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of, like, the Jerry Maguire movie, you know what I'm talking about, Tom Cruise and all that. But I hear it's a favorite in the Achterbeck household. And oftentimes you'll hear in that household, "Katerina, you complete me." And then you'll hear, "Shut up, Chris, you had me at hello." All right. I don't know if that sounded German, but you get the point, right? Now, when I first met Jill, there were feelings involved. I saw her and my eyes popped out of my head, and I thought, I need to get to know this girl. And I found out that she liked to jog. She would be running in the rain in this marathon today. That's what she would be doing. And so I decided, well, okay, I don't jog that well, but I guess I better get interested in jogging. So for about 3 years, we would jog on the levee in the Mississippi River in Louisiana. And so we would just go and we would jog. And so I remember about 6 or 8 months in of jogging with her on a pretty regular basis, I said, "Hey, Jill, would you ever think of like maybe bumping our relationship up a little bit, like maybe dating or something?" She goes, "No, never thought of that one before." And so, okay, so we jogged some more, and about 6 or 8 months again, I'm like, Jill, these feelings I have are not going away, and like, would you? No. And so like, okay, God, and so the third time, I think the word restraining order might have been used. But she continued to jog with me, and I pulled out the secret weapon. I got some of those really short jogging shorts. You know what I'm talking about? Those really thin ones. And, let me just tell you, the deal was closed very shortly after that, okay? Is it okay to lie and preach at the same time? All right. That's partially true. Okay, I'll just say. But Jill was always called perfect. I mean, a lot of you knew Jill, and people thought of her as perfect. She hated being called perfect, and she wasn't perfect. I remember at least 3 things in 28 years that she did wrong. And she was not perfect because God knew that it would be impossible for 2 perfect people to be married to each other. All right? I loved my wife, but I remember as much as I loved her, I let my anger get involved in our relationship early on. I'd get mad. I'd get angry about shopping. I'd get angry about traffic. I'd get angry about the house. Anger would come up in me. I'd get angry at the dog. I'd kick the dog. I mean, she actually had to get someone else to come tell me, please don't kick your dog. I mean, Jill would get scared. And so now my dog, that dog, Blue, is up in dog heaven watching that. I'm just tell you what, I'll put myself up against anybody in this room on how to spoil a dog now. I mean, I'm like an ace at spoiling a dog. So my dog's up in heaven going, this is not fair. And so anyway, I like to lay on the sofa, and sometimes after a hard day's work, and if I get up for just a couple of minutes, this happens right here. Watch this. All right? So he puts his head on the pillow where I put my head, like allergies all over the place, right? So, okay, you can take that down. Look, I allowed my negative feelings and emotions to neutralize the decision that I made to love my wife. I remember one day I yelled in front of the kids, and my 100-pound wife stood up and told me, you will never do that again. I told you she was mean. But here's the deal. I took for granted the person that I fell in love with. Staying in love, it takes work. It takes accountability, and it takes honesty. Some people just say, well, I just fell out of love. You probably didn't just fall out of love. You just gave up trying. You had too much conflict or too much distance. And it was easier to withdraw rather than to work on it or tell somebody, for goodness sakes. Man, I'm going to tell you, when you decide to tell somebody, that is over 50% of the battle right there. God didn't just feel like loving us because we were lovable. I look around this room and some of you would be in big trouble. But the scripture says this. In Romans 5, it says, when we were utterly helpless. It doesn't say when we were helpless. It says, when we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. Now, most people wouldn't be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who is especially good. But God showed His great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still. So if you appreciate what God did for you, would you put your hands together and just say, thank you, Lord. Look, get this. God will never love you any more than He does right now. But He will not ever love you any less than He does right now. He is faithful 100% in the way that He loves. 1 John chapter 4 again, it says this, verse 16. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. And then look at this, verse 18. There is no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. And from this verse, the second point is something that it says this, a loving person is confident and courageous. Now, I know Pastor Rick for over 20 years now, and the thing that launched him in the ministry is that when he became a Christian, he looked around and saw that other people who call themselves Christians would walk into the room and they would just be under such guilt and condemnation. There would be so little confidence of people who call themselves Christians. And if you know anything about him, you know that he wants you and he wants me to be able to look and confidently say, I'm walking in that room because I know God loves me and I'm strong. Verse 18 says, no fear in love, because perfect love casts out all fear. Some of us think that we have a fear issue, but I might suggest that maybe you have a love issue. Every time that you see courage, you probably also see love in effect. There's a lady that lived during the Holocaust in Poland named Irina Sendler. You can look her name up and read this story. During that time in Warsaw, they took the Jews and they put them in a ghetto, and they were systematically killing the Jews. But she decided, and she was punished many times for this, she personally saved 2,500 children from being killed in that ghetto. And what she would do, she would put some in an ambulance under a stretcher and hide them. She would put some in sewer pipes and underground passageways and get them out of there. She would put some of them in a suitcase and put them on a trolley or a train just to get them out of that ghetto. And sometimes she would pretend the child was so sick, about to die, and take that child away. But she saved 2,500 children. And in an interview, somebody asked her, "Where did you find all the courage to do this?" And she said this: "I don't know if I had a lot of courage, but I do know I had a lot of love. I was taught that if you see a person drowning, you must jump into the water to save them, whether you can swim or not." Come on, somebody. Look, if God's love is really active inside of you, I believe you will reach out to others in spite of the possibility of rejection. Just because you are outside of someone else's circle of love does not mean that they have to be outside your circle of love. Enlarge your circle of love to include people who don't include you. You know, most successful business or salesmen, they get rejected more than 80% of the time. But that 20% can make somebody very wealthy. And they just put up with rejection because they know that success is on the other side of that. We often feel rejected because we feel like people don't love us enough. But I think sometimes we feel rejected because we don't love people enough. Counselors will tell you that a lack of love inside of a person, they call a love tank, a lack of love inside of a person is the source of most emotional pain that they deal with. And at the end of this service, if it's all right with you, I just want to pray with us that we would just be overwhelmed by the love of God. Is that all right with you? We're going to do that today. Every year in Alaska, they have this event called the Iditarod. Now, you've probably heard of the Iditarod with the dogs pulling the sled. This is the Iditarod. It's 170 miles of cross-country skiing through ice, sleet, snow, and all sorts of terrain that they have to go through. And there's this man named Jim Jaggers who one year, I don't know which year it was, but he was so far ahead of everybody else he had already skied 120 miles and had 50 miles to go, and he was 2 hours ahead of the next person. That's pretty far. And so something happened in him, and he just started crying, and he broke down and started going really slow. And with only 30 miles left, so in a 20-mile gap, one skier passed him up. So in 20 miles, somebody gained 2 hours on him. And it so affected him that he snapped. And the story says that he pulled out his sleeping bag and went to the side of the path and literally fell asleep while everybody else just passed him up. Have you ever felt like just giving up? Have you ever felt like, life is hard and I've gone through a lot right now. I just want to pull out the sleeping bag and wave my white flag and say goodbye. I just want to tell you that we need the confidence and the courage that the love of God can give us. Can I have an amen? You know, the secret to living with confidence is who or what we place our confidence in. You know, if you place your confidence in yourself, you're going to be shaky because you don't have enough in you to be confident. The opposite of confidence is uncertainty. But when we place our confidence in God, Philippians 4:13 is very true, that we can do everything through Him who gives us strength. Okay? You with me still? The last point I just want to make, and I'm going to tell a little story before I get into it, and that is a pastor called me just this week and told me about a couple he had counseled. And let me just say this, the couple's doing well, but he said they came in and their marriage was just in bad shape. And so he started asking a lot of questions and found out that they had created, he goes, now, tell me in the house who does what? Because he just got around to who does what in the house, who pays the bills, who does what. And they pulled out a sheet of paper and had it all listed who does what. Who pays the bills, who takes out the garbage, who does the dishes, who changes the toilet paper rolls. He said, look, you wouldn't have believed this list. Now, the Moslers tried that, and it didn't work because Matt thinks that when the dog licks the dishes, he can put it back up in the cabinet, you know. Anyway, he and I have brothers. Our dogs are brothers, and exactly, from the same litter and everything. But this couple, their marriage was just falling apart. And so what was started with passion ended in performance. And so the last point, and I think the most important thing that I want to say here today, is that love is lost when it becomes a list. This is a point about religion. Revelation 2:2. I know all the things you do, list. I've seen your hard work and your patient endurance. I know you don't tolerate evil people. You've examined the claims of those who say they're apostles but are not. You've discovered they are liars. You have patiently suffered for me without quitting. List, list, list. But I have this complaint against you. This is Jesus talking to one of the churches. You don't love me or each other as you did at first. Look how far you've fallen. Turn back to me and do the works you did at first. This verse is actually very good news from where I sit at New Life Church, because we do a lot of things around here. We train a lot of people to do things. But I'm going to tell you, the school of ministry or anything else we do, the first thing we want to get into people is the heart of what we do, and then the rest will follow. But if we just teach them the methodology of what we do without the heart, this church, we always sit around in a room and think, what could cause our church to become religious and stale? What could cause us to become mean and ineffective? And we sit and we talk about these things. We're always conscious that it could happen to us, but this will only happen when we allow methodology to take over what only the heart can do. Look, I've had several different jobs here. I was actually the first campus pastor here at this campus. I was involved in building this building and launching the grand opening here, and in Conway as well, and many other buildings like Russellville and some of the other Hot Springs, some of the ones where we have launched campuses. And one thing that I've learned is that we have amazing serve teams. Their heart is good. You can talk to any person who serves coffee or holds a door open or works in the parking lot. If you're working in the parking lot, you got a good heart. I'm just telling you, it's good-hearted people, but When I was in campus development, I would travel around to campuses, and the pastors would tell you that I don't walk into a room looking for what's good. I look for one or two things that are not going so good. Because I think if we walk in and we realize what's not going good and we fix it, then maybe we won't stray as much, right? So the campus pastors, they'd kind of cringe when I'd walk in, and I got to be nice after a while. But one thing that we learned about a year or two ago, and this is on my heart, and anybody who's been around me for the last year knows that this is what is on my heart. When we launch a campus, and we're launching a lot of campuses, we think about, okay, we have soft launch, and then we have the grand opening. So everybody listen, the core team, they're going to be people walking through those doors for the first time. They're going to be your new friends. They're going to be church members. They're going to be people that help us. We open those doors because we have some sort of purpose in us that says we're going to reach that city that we're going to. And so some energy, we open those doors and we talk to people and we find out what's your wife's name and who are your kids and where do you work? What do you love? What do you do for a hobby? And then we take that information and we connect them with somebody in the church because we care. We call that a conversation where we have levels of conversation, but that level of conversation is when you ask them and you take the time. Have you ever seen Rick Bezet in the foyer? He's focused on one person and he wants to find out what's going on in their life and he'll pray for them right there. And I'm telling you, over time, we get our life groups going, and we get our serve teams going, and we've made our friends, and everything's good. But I just want to tell you that every weekend, hundreds of people walk through those doors, and it's grand opening for them. The first time that they're walking in. And it's all right that we have people at the doors and all these places, but what's happening between the doors? If people are not engaged. Pastor Rick says this all the time. People don't leave a church over something technical. They leave a church because they don't feel loved. There's not a system that you can create that causes someone to go and interact with someone because they love them. You cannot institutionalize what must be born out of love. All right, let me read this, and we'll go. 1 Corinthians 13, everybody knows it, but I'm going to read some out of the Message Bible. If I give everything I own to the poor, and even go to the stake to be burned as a martyr, but I don't love, I've gotten nowhere. So no matter what I say, what I believe, and what I do, I'm bankrupt without love. Love never gives up. Ouch. Love cares for others more than for self. Love doesn't want what it does not have. Love doesn't strut, doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others. It isn't always me first. It doesn't fly off the handle. It doesn't keep score of the sins of others, doesn't revel when others grovel, takes pleasure in the flowering of truth, puts up with anything, trusts God always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going till the end. The Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, with all the suffering and everything that he had been through, that it is the love of Christ that compels me to do all that I do. Starbucks lost their way. And the way they had to get it back was this. They had to admit that something was wrong. How many of you in this room would say, if I look back over my life, there are other times in my life where maybe I loved God a little more than I feel right now. Maybe there are times in my life where I've had more joy than I've had, and you admit. You know what admitting is? It just means confessing. When we admit what God already knows, we're just confessing. And then We just got to remember all that God did for us while we were utterly helpless. He did everything that we could possibly need to have love in our hearts. And finally, we just changed directions. This isn't a time where you feel, oh, let me find something and beat myself. Let me feel guilty about this. No. Let's realize that the love of God is something you can have, and we change directions from the way that we're living to a place where the love of God is big in us. We just have to do what we did at first. Can I ask you to stand up?